Uh, quite a few years ago, I was involved in homeschooling my grandkids, and in different ways. There are four of them, and I mostly was well. In addition to helping them with their homework and things like that, I taught social studies and history. And in the course of doing that, I made a number of games to help enhance that. And I made several States of Siege style games, although because I was teaching history, I heavily scripted it so that it would dovetail with the event. So it's more of an exercise. I mean, there's some decision making in it, but for the most part, it's a stripped down version of this. And I did it because the kids were like 10 and 11 and that age, and I wanted them to be able to see some of the history come to life for them and give them something tactile to do, like rolling dice, like you do in States of Siege, and having a map and tracks and a very minor decision making. So I'm just going to demonstrate one of the games I made. This one is called The Kings of Israel, and it's a game pretty much about ancient Israel as recorded in the Old Testament, and particularly the time period after King Solomon's kingdom was ripped into two, and Israel basically split, and the southern kingdom was called Judah, and with the capital in Jerusalem, and it was made up of two tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and then the other 10 tribes became the northern kingdom of Israel with their capital in Samaria. And so this game is basically about the first king through the destruction of the northern kingdom of Israel. So I put a lot of historical events or text on the cards, and the cards are played in order of the kings. So I mean, it is very heavily scripted, more than it is game, but it's a tactile exercise. So I'll go through some of this now. So on the map, I basically have a kind of a hand-drawn map of the Fertile Crescent area, and I have the problems that were confronting the northern tribe of Israel. One problem that's evident is that they were always having infighting and civil war. So I have a civil war tract that they can lose the game on. They also had enemies like Philistia and Moab. The southern kingdom, their brothers, Judah, was also in conflict with them often. They had issues with Syria, and also eventually they were conquered by Assyria. And in this game, I have one other problem track, and that is the internal corruption of the leadership and the religion through the period of that kingdom. So all of these are ways to lose the game by getting to the capital, the Samaria box. And most of it's very sterilized, but I did this so that it would stick fairly close to history, although once in a while you'll get a game that just won't play out. Anyway, we'll see how this goes. So the first card is the first king, King Jeroboam, and he started the 10-tribe kingdom of Israel, the breakaway. And interestingly, he was raised by his mother, Zeruiah, and during his predecessor's reign, Solomon's son Rehoboam, he had to flee so he wouldn't be killed, and he fled to Egypt. And in Egypt, Pharaoh Shishak protected him for a while, and then eventually he came back to the 10-tribe kingdom, to Samaria, and he reigned for a total of 22 years. And during the course of his reign, he instituted calf worship so that his people wouldn't have to go down to Jerusalem. He felt that that would be a threat to his kingdom. And he's also the king that allegedly thrust his hand out against the prophet when he didn't like what he heard, and his hand withered. And he apologized, obviously, and then the prophet restored his hand to its normal use. And he, being the first king of the northern kingdom, he had issues with the southern kingdom, Judah. So what happens with this card is the Judah track gets moved down one, and because of his corruption from the scriptural worship from the Ten Commandments, his corruption level drops down too. But this 22-year reign, I chose to give him 2 actions to try to, buttress. So I'm going to take the first action against Judah, and I get to roll a 4 or a 5, and I get a 1, so that failed. I'm going to leave the corruption track alone, and I'm going to take another roll on the Judah track, and I got a 4 this time, so I basically have got him partly restored to what he was before. So with 1 card, you get 22 years of history down. The next king was King Nadab. He was the son of his predecessor, Jeroboam, and he continued with the calf worship for the northern kingdom. And he had a few problems. He had war with the Philistines, and he really only lasted about 2 years as king because he was assassinated by Baasha. So his kingdom was marked by corruption, so that caused the corruption track to now drop down to 8. Then he's got civil war due to his issues within his own government and with Baasha. And then he also has trouble with the Philistines. So all 3 of these tracks moved down 1. He only ruled for 2 years, so I only gave him 1 action. I'm going to try to push the Civil War track back. I need a 4 or a 5 to do that. I got a 4, so that was successful. But he is not a king that has a destiny to get very much done, so that's about the best we could expect. The next king came after his assassination, and it was Baasha, the one who assassinated him. And he was the son of Ahijah from the tribe of Issachar. And of course, he took the kingship by coup. And he ended up striking down the entire household of Jeroboam. So he ended up at war with Judah and Syria. He continued the calf worship of his predecessors, and he actually ruled as king for 24 years. So I guess you could say he had a successful coup. So in this case, his corruption is going to go down to 7. The fighting with Judah goes down 1, and Syria goes down 1. So with him, I have 3 action to represent his 24 years. So I am going to try to move the Syria track back, and I fail that with a roll of a 2. I'm also going to try to push Judah back, and that one is successful. And then finally, I want to put Philistines back, and I need a 4 or a 5, and I don't get that. So overall, this was an unsuccessful turn. The next king that comes up is King Elah, and he was the son of the predecessor, Baasha. And he had a chief of chariots named Zimri, and he ended up assassinating Elah while he was drunk. And so Elah only ruled for 2 years. And the main event was the coup here. And so the Civil War track is reduced by 1, and I have 1 action. I'm actually going to use that action against the Civil War track. And I rolled a 5, so I was successful there. So his chief of chariots who assassinated him was Zimri, and he becomes the next king. And amazingly, he ended up wiping out the entire house of Baasha. And Baasha was the father of his predecessor here. And he ended up only ruling for 7 days. and the army made Omri the king. So in this case, the civil war is continuing within the nation, the northern kingdom of Israel. Plus, they had issues with the Philistines, so the Philistine track goes down one also. I only have one action here because he only ruled 7 days, so this is pretty generous giving him one action. But I'm going to try to move the Philistine track back, and I failed. So that didn't work out so good for Zimri, the killer of his lord. The problems continue. The next rulers are Omri and Tibni. And Omri was the army leader for King Elah, and the people were divided between Omri and Tibni for 4 years. They both were kind of trying to rule at the same time, and Tibni was kind of a rival leader. So eventually Tibni was killed by Omri's supporters, and during this period Israel was at war with Syria, and they were being forced to pay tribute to Assyria, who was a rising world power. So this is a devastating time for the northern kingdom. The corruption within the government was so bad, the corruption track moves down, the civil war track moves down, the Syrian war track moves down, the Philistine war track moves down, and because they're paying tribute, Assyria is now becoming a problem. Fortunately, I've got 3 actions to take with this, so I'm going to try to move the Civil War track back one, and that's successful. Then I'm going to try to move the Syria track back, and that fails. And I'm going to try to move the Philistines back, and that's successful. So the card could have gone worse. I mean, this card is a devastating card because you get 5 attacks against you. But it shows the weakness of the kingdom when you have rival powers. As the last card said, Tibni was eventually killed by supporters of Omri. So the next card is when Omri's ruling by himself. He's the sole king of Israel now after Tibni's death. And he ruled for another 8 years. So his rulership ended up being a total of 12 years. And he continued in the religious calf worship that Jeroboam had started. And the corruption of his government was known. So the corruption track moves down. The civil war track moves down. And of course, they're still paying tribute to Assyria. So the Assyrian track moves down. Now, King Omri has 3 actions to take. So I decide to take one action to move the Civil War track back. And that fails. I'm going to take another one to move the Philistine track back. That one fails. And now I'm going to try to move the Syria track back, and that one's successful. So, not a great run here for King Omri. So the next ruler that we have is King Ahab, and he was the son of Omri, and he happened to be married to Queen Jezebel, and we've probably heard that name before. And Jezebel brought in addition to the calf worship of Baal, and the king Ahab condoned her bringing that into the religious system. And Ahab was known for numerous building projects, but he did have war with Syria during his time, and he also was still paying tribute to Assyria, the rising world power. So in this case, we have the corruption track continues to advance. The war with Syria advances. The war with the Philistines advances, and the Assyrians. So he has 3 actions to take, but he does have a bonus on rolls on the corruption track because his house manager, Obadiah, actually did some things to reduce the corruption, to kind of undo what Ahab was about. So because I have this bonus, I'm going to try to move the corruption track back with one of my die rolls, and that's successful. I'm also going to try to push the Philistines back, and that's successful. And then I want to push Assyria back. Assyria is a little bit difficult because it's a 4, so I have to roll a 5 or a 6 to get Assyria to go back. And that is successful. So overall, King Ahab had a pretty good run there. Because the Old Testament has so much to say about King Ahab, I gave him a second card representing not only the length of his reign, but also the fact that so much happened during it that is actually recorded. So in the second part of his reign, he secured a marriage alliance with the kingdom of Judah. So this maybe will help the issues between Judah and Israel. He also continued warring throughout his reign with Syria, and unfortunately, the infamous event happened with Naboth, where his wife plotted to have him killed so that Ahab could have Naboth's vineyard. But all in all, King Ahab reigned for 22 years. So the Syrian war track advances and the Philistines track advances. And this time, I also have a bonus with the corruption track because the prophet Elijah is trying to talk some sense into him. So if I want to reduce the corruption, I could use a bonus on the corruption table. But I'm going to try to push the Assyrians back, and that die roll is successful. And then I have another action. I'm going to try to push the Philistines back. That's successful. And I have a third die roll, and I'm going to use it on corruption because I got that bonus because of the prophet Elijah. And that's successful. So this worked out very good, and kudos to Elijah for talking some sense into Ahab. So next is King Ahaziah, and he happened to be the son of Ahab and Jezebel. He continued with his mother's Baal worship. They continued with calf worship. And Ahaziah ended up making an alliance with Judah for shipping. However, the ships ended up being destroyed according to the Old Testament. He also engaged in warfare with the country of Moab. And another thing that happened in this fellow's life is he had an accident which left him permanently ill. And his reign only lasted about 2 years, so this was not a great thing for him. During his period, yes, there was corruption, so the corruption track advances, the Moab track advances, and his issues, I advanced the Judah track because of that alliance gone bad with the destruction of all those ships. Now again, I have the prophet Elijah, which can give me a roll modifier on the corruption track if I want to use that, but I feel that the Moabites are more of a threat right now, the Philistines and the Moabites, so I'm going to roll on that one, and that definitely moves back. And I'm also going to take one more action, and I am going to use it against Syria, and it's successful. So overall, King Ahaziah did okay. The next king in the succession was King Jehoram. He reigned for about 12 years. He happened to be a brother to Ahaziah, the son of Jezebel, but he definitely was described in the Old Testament as clinging to calf worship. He was at war with Moab, and he ended up being shot and killed by Jehu's arrow, kind of a blind arrow out of the nowhere. And during this period is when Elijah flees to Mount Horeb, and Elijah is asked to anoint Jehu as the new king of Israel. And then he begins training his successor as a prophet, Elisha. So during King Jehoram's time, yes, the corruption track advances, the war with Syria advances, and the war with Moab advances. And I do get a bonus for the Syria track because of the prophet Elijah with some positive prophecies regarding the issues with Syria. And I do have 2 actions to take here. The first one I'm going to take against the Philistines because they are getting dangerously close. And so that's successful. I push them back, and I only have 1 more action. And I am going to take this against Syria because I have the bonus. And that is successful. So anyway, Jehoram dies at the hands of Jehu's arrow. So Jehu was anointed as the next king by Elijah, so he rules for 28 years. Yes, this is the same Jehu that threw Jezebel out the window. He was at war with Syria, so the Syrian track advances, but Jehu destroys the entire house of Ahab, and he clears Baal worship out that kind of went along with Jezebel, but the calf worship continued, and there was conflict with Assyria as well. So that track also advances. But Jehu was a dynamic man, and he gets 4 actions to take here. So I am going to, first of all, try to move the Assyria track back, and that's successful. I'm also going to try to move the Philistine track back, and that fails. I'm going to take another shot at it. That one fails. And I'm also going to try to move Syria back, and that is successful. The next king in the lineup is King Jehoahaz. He was the son of Jehu. However, he wasn't like his father. He was unfaithful, and he was at war, continuing at war with Syria, with King Hazael. And his son, Jehoash, actually shared the kingship with him for 3 of the years. But Jehoahaz actually ruled for a total of 17 years. And yes, there was corruption during his kingdom, and he was, as I said, at war with Syria. But there is a bonus for the prophet Elisha, who was Elijah's successor, if any roles are taken on the corruption track. I only get 2 actions with this fellow, so I am going to try to push Syria back, and that's successful. And my other action, I'm going to take on the corruption track because I get that bonus, and that's successful. So the next king is Jehoash, and as I said before, he ruled for 3 years as a co-ruler with his father Jehoahaz. But Jehoash is the grandson of Jehu, and he did continue to allow calf worship, as has been the story from the beginning with this nation. And he's the one where the prophet said, fire arrows into the ground, to try to test his determination. He only fired 3 arrows into the ground, so he continued to be at war with Syria, and he ruled for 16 years. However, his rulership was corrupt, so the corruption track moves down. The war with Judah track moves down. The war with Syria moves down, and the Philistines. So he had a lot of issues to deal with. However, if I choose to roll against the corruption track, I can get a bonus because of the prophet Elisha trying to talk some sense into them. But really, my first roll is going to be against the Philistines because they are always on my back, and I've got them moved back a little bit now. My next action I am going to take on the corruption chart, and that is successful. And I think I'm going to take one more, and that's successful. So that buys me a little bit of time on the rot from within. The next king is King Jeroboam II, and he was the son of his predecessor Jehoash, and this fellow reigned for 41 years. He did continue the calf worship, but he was a great builder and improved the infrastructure and the defenses and the fortifications. However, he was corrupt, and so the corruption track moves back down, and his issues with Judah continued. We do have the prophet Amos now. He wrote some of his book to warn the people in the northern kingdom of Israel. So I can add a die roll modifier if I want to push back corruption. Unfortunately, I got to start with Judah. Judah's getting kind of close to the danger zone, and that fails. I'm going to take another action against Judah, and that one's successful. And my final one, I am going to go with the corruption track and kind of get that bonus, and it fails anyway. So I have a second card in the deck for Jeroboam II because he ruled for the 41 years, and there was a lot of action recorded in the Old Testament, so I wanted to include more things going on during his reign. One of the things that he did was restored the land that had been lost to Syria beforehand, so that was successful. But he continued to have issues with Judah, so that track moves down, and of course Assyria, the rising world power, which ended up being the end for them. I get 3 actions, and this time I have a couple of bonuses. I have the prophet Jonah, and I can add 1 to anything on the Syria chart, so I might take advantage of that. And then I have the prophet Hosea, and I can add a die roll if I want to push back the corruption chart. But the first thing I want to do is work against Judah, because they're a problem. I fail on that one. I'm going to try to push the Syria track back using my prophet Jonah as a die roll modifier. That one's good. And now I'm going to take 1 shot here at Assyria, which is a tough one. That fails. So overall, this was not a good turn. There's a bunch of danger spots right now on my map. The next king is King Zechariah. He is the son of Jeroboam II, and he was the last of Jehu's family to rule in Israel. And his rule lasted only 6 months. There are 11 years of this record missing, but he was assassinated by Shallum. So the Civil War track advances because of this assassination. And there's only 1 action because he really only ruled for a short period of time himself. And so I'm going to take the action on the Civil War chart, and that's successful, so I pushed that back. The next king, of course, is King Shallum. He's the one that he ruled only 1 month. He was murdered by Menahem, and this fellow causes the Civil War track to advance. I only get 1 action. The guy only ruled 1 month. I'm going to try to push the Civil War track back, and that's successful. So thankfully. Then I have King Menahem. He ruled for 10 years. He promoted calf worship. He executed vengeance for the assassination or the murder of Shallum. But he did have a problem with the ascending world power Assyria, and Tiglath-Pileser invaded his country. So the corruption track moves down, the Civil War track advances, and the Assyria track advances. And I've got 3 actions, and I still have the prophet Hosea trying to help straighten things out religiously, so I get 1 added to the die roll on the corruption track. But the problem is I am in danger with Assyria, so I've got to really move Assyria back. They're down to the 1 box, so Assyria, the first die roll fails. I still get 2 more. Second one pushes them back. That's fortunate. And I'm going to also try to push back the Civil War, and that's successful. So I wasn't able to use the bonus for Hosea. The next king is King Pekahiah. He was the son of Menahem, who was his predecessor. This fellow was a calf worshiper. He had an adjutant named Pekah, and Pekah and 50 men murdered the king. So Pekahiah really only ruled for 2 years. So the corruption runs rampant in Israel. That track advances, the Civil War track advances, and the Assyria track advances. I only get 1 action, and the Assyria track is in the 1 box, and I need a high die roll on this one, and I get it, so that was fortunate, or Assyria would have an early conquest. The next ruler is his adjutant, King Pekah, and he was part of the conspiracy against his predecessor. This fellow had calf worship and was at war with Judah, so the corruption advances to the 1 box, the Judah advances to the 1 box, the Civil War to the 1 box, and Assyria to the 1 box. So I am going to lose this game, probably. I do get a bonus die roll on the corruption track, which is in the one box also, due to the Prophet Hosea. So I'm going to push that one back, and that's successful, thankfully, for the die roll modifier. I'm going to try to push Assyria back, and I need a high die roll, and that fails. And now I'm going to push Judah back, and that's successful. I have a continuation of Pekah with the next card. He ruled for 19 years, and there was a lot of action. Unfortunately, the corruption track goes back down to 1, the Judah track goes back down to 1, and the Assyria track actually goes to the Samaria box, which loses the game. Now with the kids, there's a couple things I did with this game. I actually made an extra box on these tracks to give them a little bit better chance at winning. So instead of starting on the 5 column, I could adjust some of the boxes and put it on like a 6 column, which I didn't do in this playthrough. And there's another thing I allowed for the kids to get them out of losing the game like this, is I gave them the 3 actions on the card to save themselves. So I've got 3 actions to save myself from Assyria, but I need a 5 or a 6 to do it. And I got a 2, that doesn't work. I roll another 2, doesn't work. And then I roll a 3, it doesn't work. So I would lose the game here normally. There's only one other card left. So to get the historical result, I would have had to draw this last card, which is when historically Assyria conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. Some say that was in the year 740 BC. But anyway, that's how this game played out. And the kids had a lot of fun, and they learned a lot of the Old Testament history for the northern kingdom of Israel as recorded in the Old Testament. So anyway, hopefully this wasn't too boring, but if it was, I'm sure you didn't watch it. Anyway, thank you and have a great day.